the only real advantage you have, like the both of us have in the world of competition in the coffee industry, is the fact that we're the only ones running our companies, right?
Exactly.
So like there's not a copy of you running this other company somewhere else, right? So why would your company be so similar to someone else's company, right? Shouldn't your company be a very individual, unique experience because you're an individual, unique person? Right?
100%. Welcome back to another episode of the Coffee Made Me Do It podcast. My name is Dario and I'll be hosting most, if not all, of these episodes. In this episode, I got to sit down with Patrik Rolf, the founder of April Coffee, while he was in South Africa for the Creative Coffee Week hosted by the Coffee Magazine. If you'd like to know more about the event, it is linked in our description. I apologize for the background noise while we were recording in a private room. There was setup happening for the event, so there is a little bit of noise, but the sound is still really good. And I'm very happy with the conversation we had. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Here's Patrik Rolf. Yeah, Patrik, well, welcome to South Africa.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, man. We normally bump into each other in Europe at these World of Coffee events, and it's good to have you in our neck of the woods. Really, really looking forward to the April Cup. Just a bit of context, Patrik's here to speak at the Creative Coffee Week, an annual event hosted by the Coffee Mag in Durban, South Africa, as well as host the 5th edition of the April Cup, which we are really excited for. It's our first proper, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this because we've had the AeroPress Champs for a long time, but our first proper filter coffee event in South Africa. We don't have the Brewers Cup yet, so we're looking forward to having that in the future, but really excited to see people swinging kettles in circles over the next couple of days, brewing some tasty filters. So yeah, welcome, and I'm looking forward to what the next couple of days have in store for us.
It's going to be really interesting, for sure. I mean, having the competition in general is really interesting, and I think being in South Africa for the first time is really interesting as well, right? It's always special to kind of see industries and markets that you haven't been to yet in the coffee world. And as you say, we go a while back, right? But yeah. I still don't really know what's happening down here, so I'm excited to be here.
I don't really know what's happening either. We just stick our heads in the sand and keep working,
Yeah.
No, but in all honesty, the industry is growing beautifully. I think we are in a really exciting time in the South African specialty industry where the story is being written like it is in every part of the world, I guess. It's a young industry, but we're probably 5 years behind Europe. And that gives us the benefit of knowing what's coming. So we can sort of predict the trends that we can see having happened in Europe and try and account for what's going to happen here. And it's been really interesting over the last 5 years that I've been running my own roastery, how that has been the case. So we have a bit of a cheat map to follow. So thanks to you and all the other amazing entrepreneurs in the European specialty space. But yeah, for those of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time, I am not a professional podcast host. I just love exploring motivation, passion, and the stories of entrepreneurs and coffee professionals around the world. And I've been fortunate enough to meet some amazing people and have these conversations. And today I'm really excited to explore the April story and the Patrik Rolf story. Obviously, I've read your book and have listened to other podcasts with you either hosting or as a guest, and I think a lot of other people have. So we'll try and steer away from some of the topics most commonly asked or explored, specifically competition. I'm pretty sure that's the number one thing you get asked about.
It's a big one, yeah, for sure.
And as a non-competing coffee professional, I am very keen to explore other areas of your your repertoire. Before we get into it, though, like a little bit of background for our listeners. How did you get into coffee?
That's, I mean, long background. And I think for, as you mentioned, like for anyone that wants like full story, there is a book out there from Nerd to Pro, my little COVID project, more or less. But yeah, it started, so I'm from Sweden originally. Most people think I'm Danish because I now live and work in Copenhagen, which I'm not. Big difference. I started to work in coffee. I mean, that's a long story, but I was involved in a very different industry for a long time. And we were running basically a consultancy company. And it so kind of happened that one of the customers I got into that company was a coffee roastery. So a local coffee roastery in Sweden called Damateo or Gothenburg. And we were actually working with, specifically working with how do they communicate specialty coffee to their customers. And
That's
this was
so
like
interesting.
10, 12 years ago, right? It's like the question we still try to figure out in the industry. And I knew nothing about coffee, but I was kind of tasked with dealing with them because it was my customer. So the way it worked is that we brought in a bunch of just basically talented young entrepreneurs over like a one day, had this like case where they came in different teams and were supposed to like just pitch ideas to how do they fix this? Like, how do they communicate specialty coffee to their guests in their coffee shops, right? And I kind of was in there the whole day listening to all the pitches, and it turns out that everyone was just so bad. They were so bad. And I was just like great people, really talented, right? But I could like feel how they did not understand it. I didn't understand it either, but I just, I felt really guilty because this guy paid us a lot of money and we basically failed. So like in the end of that day, I went up to this guy and I say, dude, we're going to give you the money back. Like, I know we didn't nail, like, we didn't understand this, right?
Wow.
And he was like, no, like, keep the money, but, you come work for us as a consultant, basically. So that company or our company started to work with him as a consultant to like, talk about this or try to understand this better. And that was about for 12 months. And during that time, he is like Mats Johansson is one of the, like, founders of SEA. The reason why we have coffee competitions,
Wow.
he started like the very first ones before there were like barista championships and stuff like that. So he would connect me with all of these people when I traveled because I was like out trying to drink coffee. I was like, hi Mats, where should I go and drink coffee? So I got really hooked into the whole industry thing pretty much. And this is becoming a long story now, but
No, it's good. It's good.
part of it was that I spent a lot of time in San Francisco because we had a lot of business to be done in Silicon Valley pretty much. And then I'm kind of a guy that, I find a coffee shop and I tend to go to that same coffee shop every single day. I like the routine in it. I like exploring as well, but I've always liked having, I start my day in the same coffee shop. And I found this coffee shop on Valencia Street in San Francisco that I just always went to. And I went there so often that the barista there thought that I was a barista, pretty much. And one day he just basically asked me, do you know about the barista championships? Because he was competing himself. And I didn't really know, but I like competing. I played a lot of soccer before growing up. And I didn't really ask him about it, but without me asking, he just pitched it. Like he would just went hardcore because he was so excited about competing himself. So basically after hearing him pitching it, I got really into the idea of maybe competing in coffee. So I didn't really know what was happening. I was starting to, Google on YouTube videos and stuff like that. And I got, I thought it was a pretty cool idea. So I went back home to Gothenburg. Kind of went straight to the roastery, like the guy that we were working with, Mats. I was like, dude, what's up with this competition you guys are doing? And he was like, yeah, we're going to host one next month. And I was like, can I compete in it? And to make the story a little bit shorter, like that's basically where it started for me because I trained. He gave me the key to the roastery. I came in like 4 a.m. before office hours, tried to learn how to make, espresso and steam milk and all of this. I competed. I had the dorkiest setup in the history of coffee competitions.
Come on, I thought you were going to say I competed, went straight to Worlds.
No. Like that, I think I lit candles to the judges. I'm pretty sure I did because it was this really like dark coffee shop we were in doing the presentations. And I was like, well, that's cozy. Let's do that. And I started like the shittiest signature drink ever, right? But I had a lot of fun. I wasn't last, I wasn't first, but most importantly, I met all of these people that clearly really cared about what they were doing, right? Because that's the essence of it. And then just for fun, Mats, the owner, was like, "Don't you want to start working with coffee?" And I was like, "No, I'm not going to work with coffee." Like I was a pretty well-paid CEO at the time, and it didn't sound so sexy to start working with coffee. But after a few months, I was like, okay, but maybe I should start working with coffee. And yeah, long story short, I basically went from running that company to doing dishes in one of his coffee shops. That's about it. It's pretty straightforward, I think. But
that's amazing. I always remember Colin Harmon in his book, What I Know About Running Coffee Shops, where he would answer people who wanted to start a cafe, go and work in a cafe first. Like figure out if you actually want to be there or not.
100%.
And I know in South Africa, if you speak to a potential business owner and tell them to go work in a cafe, they're going to laugh at you. Like, they'll never do it. So
Sure.
to take that step backwards to go forwards later is pretty amazing, I think.
I mean, I think it's, one, I wanted to connect with something that I felt had more value. I was in, let's say, the tech world or whatever you want to call it, or like project management world. And I think it was a lot of money, a lot of fast pace, but very little substance, very little kind of longevity. Like, no one wanted to actually make an impact or do a difference. They wanted to be able to have a TED Talk.
Exactly.
That was the biggest difference,
The
I
Tesla
think.
and the TED Talk.
Yeah, and I think I got to a point where, I was still very young at that time, and I was like, no, like I need something with more substance. And looking at coffee from the outside at that point, I felt it had, right? I thought it was filled with all of these people that really loved, everything coffee and the value chain and respect and quality and all of this, right? Then one can debate whether or not that's true. That's a different story, right? But at least then I got really into it. So yeah, I started to I had one summer doing dishes, and every once in a while I could pull like an espresso shot on the machine, and that's still like one of the most fun summers I had, like, for sure. It was
So
like a
cool.
lot of fun.
Like low pressure, learning something new.
Yeah, for sure. Very, just being in that environment. I still really like to be in a coffee shop environment. So, I appreciate service, sharing coffee. I think that's an important part of what we do. So I really enjoyed that summer, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think one of the first international coffees I ever tasted was actually from Damateo, which is so funny.
I mean, it went a bit downhill.
Sure.
All the love to the guys, but, it's not what it, used to be,
was.
maybe. No.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's something that I really respect about a company like Tim Windelbo, where over, gosh, how many years now? 15 years, I think it is. They've had so many different people roasting their coffee, and the consistency seems to have been so good through most of that period.
Yeah.
Which is something I see, a lot of roasteries sort of have this amazing quality in the beginning because the person who's excited about it, the person who's passionate, whether it's the entrepreneur or a head roaster at that time, is just doing such a great job, and then they move on or they step back from roasting and the quality dips, and there's this sort of hope that the brand name will carry the business.
Sure, yeah.
From what they've done before. But yeah, I mean the coffees we see coming out of places like Tim, and I've had your coffees consistently over the last few years, but like not as often as I would like. But it's always been great, So, and I know you've got a lot of people roasting coffee now. It's not just you, like it was
for
in the
sure.
beginning.
We're a small little team, right? And I think that's always been, it's a necessity to some point. And it's also, I think, part of starting a company in the first place is kind of realizing, and do you have, I'm not going to say you kind of have two different styles of maybe owners, or like head roasters, call them whatever you want to, but you have the kind of one person that thinks that no one can roast coffee as good as I can, so therefore I'm going to be roasting everything, kind of. And then you have this, which is, let's say, maybe more of a Japanese approach to some degree, which I have a lot of respect for, but I just don't believe in. I believe in the strength of the team.
Yep.
And if you have a good constellation, then your own roasting and the team's roasting should be better. And let's face it, in the end of the day, roasting is, it's like everything. It's not that complicated, right? It's something that a lot of people can do if you have that attention to detail, you have the focus that is required. And I don't see it as a process that is so impossible to teach other people to do, right? And
Absolutely.
I've been through that kind of teaching process quite a few times throughout my years, pretty much, and fairly confident in being able to do that in the right way, kind of. So
I'm really interested in that conversation. Like, I completely agree with you that roasting coffee is easy, and I've said this, for years. Like, the actual act of roasting coffee is very, very simple. Just transferring heat into a grain, essentially. But doing it well and doing it consistently takes, as you said, focus and attention to detail.
Yeah.
And then I think, in my opinion, the difficult part of roasting or creating a style of coffee is actually knowing how to taste, not knowing how to roast, and then knowing how to translate flavor or what you're tasting into profiles and roasting coffee. So, I mean, that's the part that I have found most difficult to teach. It's not following profiles consistently, or even once a style of coffee has been developed, to teach how to develop profiles for that style of coffee, but more to align flavor preferences or align style preferences has been a bit more difficult when teaching others.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, there's always, I think, been this idea in coffee that, taste is subjective. And I always say that that's kind of bullshit. And I mean that in the way that it's, what a coffee is tasting, like why a coffee is tasting the way it does, let's say from a roasting perspective or from, defect processing perspective. That's not really subjective, right? So there's a reason for why a coffee tastes the way that it does. And there's several things in that value chain that has impact that, right? Then you can discuss whether it's, it's fresh lemon or candied lemon or lime, the details, right? But let's say the citrus notes in a coffee, they're there for a very specific reason, right? And as a team, it's important you understand what that reason is. And then, how do we then, let's say, replicate that or avoid that if we want to, right? Same, let's say, a defect or processing or whatever it might be, right? Tasting coffee is about understanding why the coffee is tasting the way it does without adding any kind of value judgment to it. The issue today with people tasting coffee or like learning to taste coffee is the fact that they can't taste the coffee without adding value judgment.
Sure.
It's like, I hate this, so I don't want to understand this.
Yep.
Or I love this, so I don't have to understand it because it obviously tastes really good, right?
Absolutely.
So it's tasting intentional with the idea and kind of mission to, I want to understand why. And then we can talk about value judgment on top of that later, right? Because the why is far more important, right? And I think the interesting thing with coffee roasting, I think, is that we, meaning the industry, understood or learned how to do tasty coffee before we understood why it's tasty.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
That
So
makes sense.
now we're kind of in a part where we're trying to figure out, but why is it actually tasting like this? Not saying that we know. I think the more you kind of dig into it, the more complex that really becomes. It's quite difficult, but it's interesting, right?
It's super interesting. This morning I was, I've got them here on my iPad, but I was looking at the moisture release graphs from the new Akawa 100 Pro 100X, trying to get the term right, but it's data we've never had before. It's certainly data I've never seen before from our coffees, and I think that the data doesn't match what I have read in books.
Sure.
And it doesn't match what we've been taught. When I say we've been taught, I suppose it's the same books or YouTube videos or whatever the case may be, talking about drying phase and Maillard phase and all the rest of it. Like it's cute names for what we kind of think is going on in the drum, or think that's going on in the grain.
Yeah.
But once we have the tech to actually see definitively what is actually happening, it looks very different to what we thought, So yeah, it's been great, and I think you're spot on. We've figured out how to make it tasty. Now we want to understand why, and there's some cool tech coming out to assist us in doing that. I saw the guys from Onyx playing with a machine a few months ago that was analyzing the grain and actually the different sort of chemical compositions, and that could predict flavor, which is really interesting. And obviously the massive step from moisture content to water activity. These types of leaps in understanding are just going to help us to, in my opinion, to develop more consistency and get to a good tasty cup quicker than what we have been able to in the past.
I think so. I mean, there are going to be levels to that, right? So I think which is taste-wise always been fairly easy, but I think also when you look measurements, you get to a point where measurements can quite clearly, like, so when we get a coffee and we do a full green coffee analysis on that, pretty much head to toe, so basically everything, and we cross-reference that obviously then with the farmers we buy from and the numbers that they get. Like some of the farmers do a very good evaluation, some farmers don't really do a good evaluation, same with dry mills and so on. But we kind of cross-reference that, and I think we can very easily say based on numbers if a coffee will have certain, let's say, taste notes that we don't appreciate. That's fairly simple. I think we got there. What's difficult for us now and what we're trying to understand is the difference between, good and great, or like great and fantastic. And that's been a much bigger mystery for me than the kind of, this is a bad coffee, this is a good coffee, right? Bad coffee being a coffee where there is obvious some kind of negative defect based on the farming or the processing of that coffee, right? Or let's say the varietal. But yeah, it's harder to distinguish that really, really top qualities, I think, and that's really interesting. And I mean, I think the more measurements we're doing, I think the more you understand. And I mean this with a lot of love as well, but I think it's a conversation we don't have enough in this industry. We don't talk enough about how little some farmers actually understand this aspect of coffee, or maybe understand their own coffee as a general, right?
Absolutely.
Which is, I think, one of the, let's say, larger hindrances in pushing that quality forward.
I completely agree with you. The conversations I'm having with some producers compared to others, it's like they're in different industries. There's such a big knowledge gap. And I think in some cases there are very good reasons for that. Coffee's not their main crop, or it's been so consistently easy to sell their coffee because it's been inherently good for such a long time that there isn't really a need to drive it forward.
Yeah.
But I think there are certain elements in the industry now forcing, to quote Pepe from Finca Soledad, like terroir artists, instead of like people adding, and we won't get into this topic necessarily too much now, but like the fermentations and inoculations and
I mean it's a big one, right? And I think it's everything has a lot of different. Funny on Pepe also, and I don't follow anyone on social media, but one of the team members at April referenced this. And I think as an interesting example is this post done by someone in Brazil saying that we like sorted out the floaters. So like floaters is basically the low density bad coffee traditionally, right? We sorted that out and we cupped it, and it tastes like 88. And then someone else replied, I think it was Pep. It could have been someone else, but he was like, I would have never tried a coffee from Brazil that ever scored 88 in the first place, right? He said something very interesting about it at least, right? And I think that's quality again. We get to a point now where the industry is divided in terms of what specialty coffee is. I think when we started, you mentioned Tim Endebo, like there was a very clear idea of this is specialty coffee. It should be a clean coffee. It should taste like this. If it doesn't taste like this, it's not specialty coffee. Then you can discuss roast degrees and all of this. That's a different story, right? But from a green coffee quality, right? And I think today the kind of, let's say, box we're playing in when it comes to specialty coffee is so much bigger than what it was when I first started, right? And I think that's interesting, right?
It's very interesting.
And I think there's positives and negatives as with everything, kind of, right? But I still very much stand by the idea that specialty coffee has never been as bad as it is today. I think we're like at the absolute low point in general quality, looking at what we're accepting as specialty coffee. It used to be much, much higher quality than what it is today.
I hope you're right. I hope this is.
I know it's gonna go further down for sure. Like 100%. It's because that's where the money is, right? The money is in trying to get a lot of these yeast inoculations, infusions. They were originally never intended to be done on the top grade of coffees. Those are there to lift up the commercial sector.
Exactly.
Right? So to make a pretty shit coffee a little bit less shit. Like that's really the initial idea with that, right? But then I think, farmers and producers and buyers and whatnot was like, yeah, but what if we take that and put that into some of the really good stuff? And you can't really blame them because I think in theory it sounds really fun. I'm also a person that appreciates when someone is trying to do something new, right?
Exactly.
But I think also as an industry, we kind of have a responsibility to define what specialty coffee is. And I think we're not as good at that. We were much better before.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I completely agree with that. And I'm sure that it's going to be addressed this weekend, but we've all seen the trends now as you walk into trade shows or expos, and you just like the average coffee in the room has just been dumbed down to a really bad point, and it's like every year the fad seems to change. Like, what are we excited about? So I always have huge amounts of respect for roasteries who are just sticking to a style and knowing who they are and what they do and really being steadfast on that regardless of where the trends are going, because I think in the long term that's building trust with our customers, and hopefully we'll be a part of the resurgence of high quality
Sure,
specialty,
sure.
clean coffees and so on.
I mean, I think there's room for a mix.
Mm.
We have some very very well known roasteries that are let's say the opposite of what I do, but they're really kind of well, let's go all in funk, right? And personally, I respect that because you also you start a company to do the coffees you want to do,
Exactly.
right? So from an individual level or like entrepreneurial level, I understand it, I respect it. I would never drink it, but that's a different story, right? You don't start a company to necessarily make other people happy. You should for sure, but the idea is to represent the style of coffee you want to work with, right? And that's never going to be for everyone, right? So understand it, respect it. Again, just don't want to drink it, right?
Yeah.
That's a different ballgame.
Yeah, I'm with you. So that brings us to defining and building something meaningful that is important to you and the whole April story. So you got into coffee through competition, and I have read the book. I'm gonna be honest here. Like, I'm always honest, but I'm gonna be, super honest about the book. When I received it, I was skeptical because obviously no one had ever read anything of yours before.
Sure,
And
yeah.
just because you're a good entrepreneur or a good coffee roaster or a good competitor doesn't make you a good author. And I was
True.
actually blown away. Like, really, really
cool.
well written book. Story was absolutely captivating, and I read it in a day. Like, I just couldn't put it down. Read it until late that evening, and went straight into the roastery the next day. And I was like, guys, you have to read this book. It's fantastic. So really, really well done to you. I think if you haven't read Nerd to Pro, you really need to get a copy. I think, there was nothing written about coffee for a long time. And then the few books written about coffee were very much technical focused, technique focused, talking about green coffee and roasting and so on and so forth, and brewing. But to actually hear stories behind the brands and behind the people is really, really cool. So, yeah, well done. Looking forward to the next one, I hope.
Let's see, right? I think I wrote that again during COVID, right? So
we're just waiting for the next pandemic to get the next book.
But kind of, because you don't have. I think it's one. It was trying to understand how let's say difficult or time consuming is it to write a book in the first place, right? I mean, I appreciate you have kind words to say about the writing style as well, right? But it's there's a fairly easy book to write in the sense that it's my own story.
Sure.
So it's basically write it down on paper, which was fairly simple, but it's very time consuming. So let's see, right? But I think it's, I got to a point where I still always at a point, and this if you read the book, but I've always questioned my own time in coffee and whether or not that should be much longer than what it is, right? And I think COVID, or even before COVID, I think I thought about that really a lot more, and I think it shows in my work with April, because I think that's why we, let's say, have the balls to do things in certain ways, because I have no interest in coffee if coffee can't develop into, let's say, the vision I have that it can be, right? If it stays the way it is now, then I, rather do something else than to stick around, right? So I think that's a big motivator. But part of trying to put the industry in an interesting place is, and you mentioned it before with you're 5 years behind Europe here in South Africa, so you can kind of look and see what's going on, and then you can move faster, right? That's the whole purpose with the book. It's, if, let's say you are someone that wants to start coffee, maybe you like April, maybe you don't like April, it doesn't really matter, it can still be relevant. You now have a bit of an insight and see, okay, but this is kind of how Patrik did it. And most of the stuff is in that book, right? It's actually quite transparent.
Definitely.
And so you can read that, and then you can go, okay, that's a smart idea to do it, or that's a dumb idea. But most importantly, you can make a more informed decision on your own journey, right? Because when I started in coffee, there was not like you looked at Tim Hendebo or like, say, James Hoffman, and you went, okay, but how do I do that? Like, What did they do? I have no clue. I still don't know, right?
Exactly.
Not necessarily saying you have to share your story, but I think it's value from an industry perspective to do it, because other can do, better than I can or different than what I've done, right? Or if they want to do something very similar, then, here's the blueprints, go for it, right? So,
and I think if somebody outside of coffee read your book, they'd find so much value as well. I know my own entrepreneurial journey hasn't really been inspired by the coffee industry.
Sure. Yeah.
It's been inspired by sports and, mountaineering and things that I don't necessarily do or have a deep interest in, but the stories from people who have done amazing things in their fields have always inspired me more than the industry I'm working in specifically.
Yeah.
But to have an example from our own industry of a young entrepreneur who's done it their own way, I think should inspire a lot of people. And there are tons of lessons to take from it. And I think the one note that I made for today's conversation around your book was just how impacted I was by the idea of starting with an end date. And sure. I think that might be what you're referring to just now. It's like, sure. You know, first of all, what was the end date? Do you remember?
I mean, that's still, I mean, I know, no one else really knows. Okay, and it's not in the book also, right? And it's, you know, to be frank, it's coming up, right? It's like,
and what is the thinking about that?
We're not so far up. And I think it's, you know, it's writing the book helped. And I mean, there's two sides of this, right? So, I mean, an end date can mean a lot of different things. It can mean that you walk away from coffee forever and you never touch it again, right? Or it can mean maybe this is, you know, where I stop doing what I do now and I start that next chapter, right? Whatever that is. And that can be a next chapter with April, or, you know, it could be me doing something else. The real value in it is the idea of you shouldn't be here unless you have a reason for being here, right? Because we as individuals can do other things. Right, so we talked a little bit before we started recording. Like the biggest challenge today is time, really, right? And time is not a challenge because we all have the same amount of time, right? But you get to a point where you realize you have a certain skill set, and then you have to kind of ask yourself, is this skill set, you know, better applied to what I'm doing today or something else, right? And what do you want to do in the grand scheme of things, right? Do you create enough value doing what you do today, pretty much? And I think as you have a company or you start a company, especially if it's, and I always stay away from, you know, again, value judgment's not my thing. I just do something, right? So I don't really define April as successful or not successful or anything. I very rarely had that conversation. April is what April is based on what April does. It's quite straightforward. But I think if you have a company that is fortunate enough to, you know, you can pay your bills, you can, you know, pay your staff, and you can kind of progress in some way, it's harder to let go, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it is like with everything in life, relationships, whatever, right? It's when things are okay, you don't question them. You're in them.
Yeah.
Until they stop being okay. And that's when you start questioning it, right? And I think that in general is kind of, in a way, a human flaw in the sense that I think we're all better off by reflecting more often on, is this what we should do and not be doing, right? So that's why I put an expiration date on it. And I think I still kind of, there's a part of me that regrets that I didn't put like an official date on it, because I think that would be a really, also looking at the climate today, I think that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, you know, it makes it a bit more interesting as well. And it's like a proper challenge. And I think it's, you know, I'm in a way looking forward to the day I'm not working with coffee anymore.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Which is not going to take away any of the effort. I mean, I think I've shown the industry that I'm willing to put a fair amount of effort into it, right? And I'll, you know, whenever I do something, I do it proper, and I'll continue to do it proper until that date, right? But I'm also quite convinced that when that day comes, that I'm packing up and I'm leaving.
Wow.
And I think it's going to be a good experience.
That's amazing. I really respect that hugely. I think, as you said, like once things are set up and running well, it is very difficult to step away.
Sure.
But at the same time, if you do step away to do something else while still trying to have your finger in the previous pie, both probably are negatively affected. You know, and that's just such a terrible place to be. And I think that's where so many business owners are. They're stuck in this middle ground where they aren't inspired anymore. There's no more passion. They're just going through the motions, and their customers and their businesses can feel it. So to have that definitive, we as humans, we tend to work really well to deadlines.
I think so, right? And I think it's you know, you also get a sense of you know, not stressful, but you know, positive urgency, right? And it's the same with competing, right? I always had an official date on, okay, but this time I want to win a world championship, and that's coming up really soon, and I clearly haven't done that. So, you know, I have to you know, get my back into it and make sure I do that at some point, right? But I think, again, it's not so much about winning or not winning. It's about, this is the amount of time I want to allocate in my life to try to pursue this one thing. and then sometimes you're not going to be able to achieve that, and that sucks. But that's a part of the game, right?
Absolutely.
And I think if you don't have that expiration date, you're going to get stuck. And again, nothing wrong with that. I still think everyone should be competing, right? But it's it has to be some level of progress coming out of it. Otherwise, I think it's time to step down and reflect and try to understand why is it not going the way that you should be doing, right? That's why I took a bit of break from barista as well, to kind of go, okay, but I've done this 2 years in a row. I ended up in the same spot. I'm clearly not learning, because if I'm learning, I would have done better.
Sure.
So then you have to zero yourself. You have to go in and think, okay, but what is it that I'm not doing right here? Like, what is it that I'm missing? And then the day, at least I think I figured that out. I'll be back,
Exactly.
But until then, I won't, right? So there has to be a balance. And again, it's about allocating time in life, right? We all have other shit going on. Running a company has quite a wide range of different tasks that has to be catered to, and I have a lot of ambitions with April as well that I want to try to squeeze in before my end time. So it's you have to be smart about the time.
That's exciting. I'm excited to see what you do and what the next steps are, and certainly have some questions around that just now. But I think the one, if I can pose to you the way I see April, and maybe you can tell me if I'm correct in my analysis, and if there are other motivations or intentions or ambitions for the company that might not be as obvious, but if there was something that by the time you do step away, you left a mark, or you left an impression on the industry or in your community, the people around you, that your supporters, what that would be. I see April as a progressive, forward-thinking company, very focused on communicating with high-quality design, making the world better looking, prettier place to be, but with the product of substance. And it seems that whether it's the clothing or the coffee or the brewers or the books, there's just a focus on doing everything really, really well. That's my interpretation. From an outsider's perspective, you and I never having had this conversation before, that's how I see the brand. When you hear that description, does that make you happy? Is that how you want people to see April?
I think in a lot of ways, it's funny, the design part, because, I'm not sure if you saw our early designs at April.
The first bag I got was the plain white with the grey stripe across the front.
Okay. So then you got like the good version,
okay.
which
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Not very. That was the first one. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but so very quickly, but January was it then 2016 or whatever. I tell the person I'm working for in Berlin that, okay, I'm gonna quit this year. I'll be here until we find like a new person, and we're gonna train that person, and then when I feel that person is ready to do what I do, I'm like out of here. That took until August, pretty much, bit of a process. But found the guy, quit, moved in September to Copenhagen, did my first batch in October.
Wow.
So April was pretty much, and during my, let's say the previous company, I was not, April was, I focused on finishing that properly, and then, I'm not going to touch April until, I didn't even know it was supposed to be called April by then. I'll touch that when I'm out, right? So, I mean, I put everything together in a month's time, pretty much, right? So it looked pretty shit, but what we did is that we wrote the beauties on the inside.
Yeah.
And it's still on all the packaging we have, right? And I think that was a reference for, I'm really appreciative that you think April looks good as a brand now, and I think that's it's a good friend of mine, and Max from Berlin. That's I've been lucky to have with me that whole way to work with the designs. That's he's a big reason of why it looks as it looks, and it really wasn't a consideration, but I think it as we developed, it's also I think a necessity, and the quality part makes perfect sense, because my personal interest, if we want to step out of coffee, what Patrik is interested in is quality. I happened to start a coffee company because I was a coffee roaster, and starting a company, it kind of makes sense to do something you're a little bit good at, right? It wasn't that much more complicated. But for me, what I'm really passionate about in general is quality, and the process behind how do you create quality, right? And then coffee is a tool or a medium to try to understand that better. So we do the same thing that we do with our coffee on our packaging, on our clothing, on the furnitures we have in our stores. Like these are everything has a backstory. Everything is very quality focused. Everything is very transparent in the sense that we actually know and understand where things have been produced. Visited the majority of all the producers, both farm wise and otherwise, that we work with. So we have a very good understanding for what a quality product is, right? We spend months on our shipping boxes for wholesale because that's interesting. And when I say months, it doesn't mean the visual outside or design of it. It's like, how do we design like the proper fiber to like keep our packaging intact, right? Stuff like that is really
awesome.
Interesting. So we do a lot of stuff like that, right? And I think it's that's really what's been driving April. I think it still is, because quality is a process. And I always thought the specialty coffee industry, for being in an industry where we put transparency. I don't even know what people put on the websites anymore, but yeah, we have some keywords that everyone is using, right? And we're pretty bad at it, all of us, right? I think so. For me, it's really been a deep dive into understanding quality better, and I don't think that's something you can half-ass. It has to go through everything you do. It's a lifestyle more than anything else. So that goes through as a company as well, right? That's it translates to the office tables we have in the roastery, to the design of the roastery space, to the things you see, the things you don't see, right? So it should be an environment that is very focused on quality, because I think quality comes out of that environment, right? Then in terms of let's say the impact I want to have on the industry, I think the only thing I'm trying to show people is that there's actually a way to do it your way, whatever way that is.
That's very cool.
That's the only thing I'm trying to get people to understand, because I think most people, business or whatever, looking at April early on, looking at April today, and we're a financially healthy company that is growing. People looking at the let's say the general business model idea, they would just say it's crazy, it doesn't work, like this is just stupid. Why are you buying more expensive coffee every single year? Why are you producing more expensive packaging every single year? Because we always done, right? And it really, like, on paper it doesn't make sense, but in real life it actually makes sense, right? And I think it's, this as well, coffee is an industry where a lot of people start with a lot of love, a lot of passion, and 6 months in they go, ooh, this was a bit difficult. So the first ideas goes out the door, and now we try to just cater to people and give them what they want, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's a very, specialty coffee should be better in all aspects of what we do. And I think we're not quite getting there because we don't have enough of that individuality in the process of let's say, starting a company. And I mean, it's funny because the only real advantage you have, like the both of us have in the world of competition in the coffee industry, is the fact that we're the only ones running our companies, right?
Exactly.
So like, there's not a copy of you running this other company somewhere else, right? So why would your company be so similar to someone else's company, right? Shouldn't your company be a very individual, unique experience because you're an individual, unique person? Right?
100%. And then I think we all, you must see this a lot, but I even see it in our little world in South Africa. You do something unique and then someone else tries to do something very similar.
Sure.
They take inspiration at best from your ideas. But as you're saying, there was a reason it worked in your company and doesn't necessarily work in somebody else's company. Because they don't really understood what it took to do that.
Yeah.
They just see the end result. Which is a quote that I heard on a podcast fairly recently, which was profound to me, which is, don't stress about what the competition are doing. If they're copying, they can't really, because they don't understand what made it successful in the first place.
Sure. I mean, I think that's I'm too busy to worry about what other people do, and I again mean that with a lot of respect. I know there's a lot of people in this industry that are doing great things. I just don't know about them because I'm too busy running a company and creating my version of that. And I think it's it's clear that the industry doesn't have enough, let's say, individuality in it, which is quite funny considering that most people coming into the coffee industry, I would say, are quite people with a lot of personality, people that didn't want to have the standard normal day or work, but I think industries that are a bit immature, that are a bit struggling, has a default to become very generic because that's like a safe zone, right? And it's back to this for me, it's so important to have a company. So I'm willing to step away from my values or what I want to do because I'd rather have this company, right? Which, fair enough. But I'm just not that kind of person.
Absolutely.
Like if I can't have the version of April that I want to have, then I have no interest in April, right? And I think that's the one thing that has always been setting us apart, right? Plus, it's fun to be better at what you're doing, right? I think there's always. I've had a lot of people recently that ask me like, how can you have a company for 5, 6, 7 years or whatever and still do all the new stuff that you're doing? And I'm like, how can you have a company and not do the new stuff?
You
like
should
it's
be
kind
doing
of the
more new stuff the whole
point,
time.
right? Yeah.
No, I completely agree with that, and I think a lot of people have this perspective that it's very risky to do something out of the box and to do something original because it hasn't been proven. But I think it's far riskier to follow the crowd. We're seeing that in the industry. The race to the bottom is unfortunately a race that most roasteries are involved in terms of pricing. So just continuously trying to capture market by having a better value proposition from a price perspective only. But it's a dangerous place to be because it's not sustainable. And when the C price jumps or the dollar rand goes the wrong direction, everyone's under pressure.
Yeah.
Whereas focusing on a niche and building, as Seth Godin says, your smallest viable market really resonates with me, and I think it evidently resonates with you as well because you've been so definitive around who your market actually is.
Yeah, I think so, and it's a reflection on a bit of a larger scale. I think it's so interesting, and Chicago for me is such a good example. I was there earlier this year for the SCA and Brewers Cup and all this, and the best coffee in Chicago, and I visited quite a lot of shops, was at Intelligentsia. Intelligentsia is like a massive roastery with a bunch of coffee shops.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that every Intelligentsia in the world is doing really good coffee. It's a bit all over the place, right? But the point here is that the small ones over the years now, like the small independent coffee companies, are becoming more and more like the big ones used to be, and the big ones are becoming a lot better.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So we're getting to a point where in a lot of parts of the world that the difference between the two are actually not so big anymore. And I think specialty coffee used to be this very clearly defined product that was very separated from that. But also because of what you're saying, like what's happening is that people are, whether they want to or not, they're becoming more and more like the big guys they don't want to be like,
Exactly.
right? They want to beat because they want to survive against the other small ones, right? And I think that's it's saturation. There's a lot of coffee shops in the world. There's a lot of roasteries in the world. You can't really blame them. I started a roastery as well, right? So I mean, fun for them, right? But I think it's as a company in an industry or a person in an industry, I always thought you should consider the industry as a whole, and that's not necessarily to to not compete with other roasteries. But it's also about making sure that the actions of your roastery or coffee shop or whatever that is will contribute some kind of value that wasn't there already, right? Yeah. And I think that's, it's not really what we're seeing.
Yeah, I
Not
agree.
saying that April always does that as well, right? But at least we have the intent to do that. And I think we have a little bit of a back record to prove that we're actually, doing that in some cases. Then there's more that can be done as well. But I think we need more of that.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I think one of the things that I think people are scared of is if they step out, they're going to be judged, and there's a lot of like personal attachment to one success and failure. I think
Sure.
so many people are scared to fail, and not really understanding that it's a part of life, that you don't always get it right the first time, and it's okay. But also personal criticism. I'm making an assumption here, but with a platform as big as yours, with a voice as big as yours in the industry, one has to assume that you have your fans and you also have your detractors.
I'm sure I have both. I mean, I think the thing is, and I don't mean again to come across as I don't care, but at the same time I don't care.
Well, that was going to be my question. Are you like, fuck the haters, I'm going to do this anyway?
No, I mean, it's not. I think it's. I had a conversation with a friend of mine about this the other day as well, and I think again the issue I think people have today, and it's not just in a coffee environment or entrepreneurial environment. It's like a life environment. Is that there is this inability to have a conversation with someone in any setting that doesn't lead to you having to put a value judgment on it. You know, try to do a cupping today on a cupping table without someone saying, I hate this coffee, it tastes like shit. And if you don't think it tastes like shit, then you're also shit. You should love the coffee I love, right? And I think that environment is so toxic and so unnecessary. I've always focused on the situation of like you're on that cupping table, you're tasting, and it's not about saying that this is really good or really bad. It's about, okay, but why is this tasting like this, right? And I think, with everything you do, you're always going to have people with different opinions, right? I think I've been lucky enough to not have too many people, again, like, I don't think anyone is really against it, but, people have different opinions and different ideas, and I've always been fairly outspoken when there's something I see that I don't like, for example, or maybe something I see that I do like, and there's always going to be a range of different perspectives on that. But I think the most important thing is that, everyone is right or wrong in the same time, and you can learn something from that. April has always been my own expression. Hence, I don't weigh in so much what other people do or think or say about it. I'm very thankful when people like what we do. And I don't hate the people that hate what we do. If there's someone hating, it's totally fine. I think that's okay. Again, we're just focusing on trying to do what we do as good as we can. And then eventually that will lead me somewhere, right? I think if you're also, as a business owner, if you're so focused on that output, financial numbers, other people's opinion. I mean, social media is the best example, right? People don't post what they want to post. They post what they think people want them to post, right? And it's a significant difference. And it's also as a company, right? You have a lot of companies that they don't really do what they want to do. They do what they think that customer wants you to do, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that you get to a point where you probably lose yourself in that process. And I don't think there's no amount of profit from a company perspective or followers from our YouTube channel sucks, right? In the sense that, we should probably have a lot more of everything if we did that, in a way that, we had massive taglines and, I don't know what people write, EK killer or whatever that is, right? And you just look at this and I go, dude, what, no, why?
Exactly.
What is the value in this, right? And I think it's, we always try to keep everything simple and very straightforward, right? And I think, we're never going to be the most, let's say, successful or famous, I think, taking that route, because it's not where society today doesn't want that, right? They're looking for something else. But I think integrity and doing things our way is so much more important than any of that aspects, right? It's, all of that is very secondary to me. Like, I don't really care.
That's awesome. And I noticed on social media, and you mentioned it earlier, that you don't follow anyone. Is that true on all your accounts? Do you just not follow anybody?
I mean, people are funny, right? Because they're I've had this with ex-partners as well. I know, kind of like, you don't follow me on Instagram, so you don't like me or whatever. And it's like, I mean, when did Instagram become the definitive answer to whether you like or support something, right? I mean, it's, if anything, social media made it very easy. Back in the days, if you wanted to support a coffee roastery, you bought something from them, which is how you really support someone, right? Now it's like, well, I liked your photo on Instagram, so that means I support you. Well, doesn't really matter for us if you do that. It's kind of you, sure, but where's the value in that? Very little.
Exactly.
So I think social media made it very easy for people to very casually support something without really supporting it.
That's interesting. Which
is, I think, a bit of a challenge in for humanity, maybe in general.
Especially if you want to make a living. And
I think so. It's the same. Like, I'm trying to do a new tattoo now, and found this really awesome tattoo artist, and she doesn't want me to pay for the tattoo, and I was like, that's stupid. Of course I will. And she's like, Friends doesn't pay, and I was like, well, Friends are the first ones that should pay.
They should pay
because
more.
They're the ones that support you.
Exactly.
They have your back, right? So, I think the following thing for me has just been, again, like it's. And I've been pretty frank with that. I think I even wrote that in the book. I spent my first, let's say, 5 years in the industry before April, pretty much copying Tim Endable as much as I could, right? Or, just as when I was a teenager, I copied my big brother until I was 18 and realized that there's a world outside of, what my big brother does. Maybe there's another version of myself here, right? And I think there's a lot of value in that. That's how you define yourself. you just have to get to that point where you also find yourself within that process. And I think also with social media and all the kind of distractions and noises, and you said kind of the same thing, you haven't got much inspiration from the coffee world. I don't either. I don't really see in what we do from a, let's say, an entrepreneurial perspective that is so inspiring.
Yeah.
I think other industries, sports people are just way better examples.
I completely agree.
So I think for me, it's just filtering out also, like if you spend, again, time is a limited thing. If I spend too much time looking at what other people are doing, I forget to do stuff myself, right? So I try to spend very little time looking at what other people do and a lot more time on thinking and reflecting on what do I want to do.
So I've got a follow-up question to that, which is I admire and completely respect the way that you do things, and I can relate in a big way because I also, although very active on social media in our business, and also my professional page, I deleted all my accounts before I started Bluebird. I wasn't interested in social media, and I had started again because of my entrepreneurial efforts. But I don't love the concept of social media. I think it really does show the worst in humanity a lot of the time, and it puts so much pressure on so many people to be what they think they should be instead of being what they want to be. However, staying connected to the industry or staying connected to your customers is also so important. So without following the companies that you look up to, or companies who you feel it's important to at least stay in touch with on social media, what methods do you use to actually stay in touch with them? Are there media sources that you look to, magazines, books, etc., or is it literally just a case of like catching up every now and then on your favorite websites?
I mean, good question. I think, like, first of all, let's say towards the April community, because I think that, we're on social media. So, like, we have an Instagram account at April. Like, I still don't know why, but we have one. And I still run that myself, pretty much. We don't have any social media staff, never had, will never have. I think it's a very abundant part of society. I don't get it. But, I think let's say like YouTube as well, right? I think that's a good example. It's like, we kind of started out doing some review videos, and then you go, okay, but James Hoffman exists, Lance exists, and you go, like, what I'm doing is completely irrelevant in that context. Like, someone is already doing this really well, and frankly, it's not what we're trying to do. We don't need the taglines and it's just not so interesting. I just want to find good stuff and brew good coffee. So, then we started to do the homebrewing videos, where it's basically me visiting a bunch of people around the world. It's been like 45 apartments or houses now around the
45?
World. Yeah, it's pretty crazy since
amazing.
Last like July in 15 countries or whatever. So it's been a bit weird, but really interesting, right? So I think it's, for me, it's I'm also not stupid. Like, social media is a thing, and I think there is probably relevance in it, but the way that I think then is that, okay, but how do I twist it in a way that, one, I actually enjoy doing it, and two, I create value, right? And all the social media we do, all the media we do, is catered towards our audience, right? Yeah. So it's about how do we improve the April experience for the people that are within that experience. We have no interest in other people. We're very happy when people join our little club, right? But everything we do is for that club. Then in terms of personal, let's say, inspiration, or I'm not sure. Like, I don't really do podcast. I have a lot of people sending me podcast links all the time, and usually I say I've actually listened to them, but I haven't. And I don't read the news. Don't watch other companies' websites. I pretty much stay out of all of it. There's an exception. There's a gym company in the U.S. that's always been like an inspiration for April. Elite FTS, and there's a fashion brand in Japan, Capital. That's like those two. Like, I can once a month I can like go to their website and just like look at it. But I mean, there has really nothing to do with April. But it's just like it's a mindset I appreciate.
Inspiration.
For sure. But I think apart from that, again, like, I'm spending so much more time trying to almost isolate myself from that. Granted, I mean, I'm sitting here with you and we're talking, and you're a couple.
For sure.
So, that's an interesting one. And I mean, I've done one or two podcast rounds myself, right? Whenever I got a little bit stuck with April, I go, now I have a podcast. I need to talk to a few different people and ask some questions to see if they come up.
It is a great way to get in front of some people.
It's a great way to do it. You write them a message that you want to take a call. They're like, no, do you want to be on a podcast? Well, yeah, sure, I want to be on a podcast.
Exactly.
Right? So, we have, I have podcasts with Tim, with James, with Stephen Layton, with all of them in a way, right? And I think that's interesting also, right? But I've never been at a point where I don't feel I can figure out what I want to do myself. Like, I haven't had that kind of dry spot where I go, like, fuck, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's always been a very natural process.
Do you find that I find myself in a space where it's like, I actually can't decide. I'm very good at deciding, but there are actually so many options of what to do next that you have to make hard decisions to focus on a certain avenue or a certain direction. So instead of creative block, you're actually having to creatively block the stuff that isn't relevant right now.
I think for me, like, I've been always very good at saying no. So I think some people looking at what I do based on social media, I think they feel that I do a lot of things.
Yep.
But I say no to 70%. So what you see is the 30% that I then said yes to or like wanted to do. Most of it is actually saying no to a bunch of stuff. So there's a lot of things that I could have jumped on in many different shapes or forms. But I have a very clear vision with April, and I never had an issue seeing how a decision would feed into what that vision should be in the future. Sure, other people, I think, looking from the outside might have a hard time seeing the connections sometimes, but with time it always becomes really clear. And it's rare that any kind of road you're on is perfectly straight, right? Sometimes you take what might seem to a detour, but it actually makes perfect sense 2 years from now, right? You just don't. Not everyone is able to see it, right? And that can be an internal issue in a company. It can be an external issue. Some people are massive investors, and then that can be a big issue. There's a lot of sides to it, right? But I think for me, I've always seen that connection, and I've always been very happy with rattling the cage a little bit, doing something that someone might think is a little bit unusual or different from what they thought I would do. But then with time, I think it's always been very clear that it does align everything.
That's so cool, man. I'm a big fan of your entrepreneurial approach, and I can relate to a lot of it. And I think that your fingerprint is all over April, and I think that it's very easy to see it when you start looking at the different parts of the April brand, from brewers through to clothing and the book and all the rest of it. Just the quality of the actual print material that you've.
The book is a pretty cool printing company. Actually, it took me
amazing.
a while to find them. It's
Really?
One of the best printers in Europe, right? And that was such a fun process, right? I think it's. Again, we don't just randomly print a book, right? It's not
Exactly.
like, let's take the easy. We took a really.
I mean, why would
printer.
you?
I mean, true.
So I think this week's going to be really interesting. I'm like really interested to see how your message is received by the audience, and to see how people appreciate your coffees. And I'm actually wearing a t-shirt now. A friend of mine, Walter, owns a very successful tattoo shop in Cape Town.
Cool.
He's actually done most of my right arm, and he also owns the South African International Tattoo Convention.
Okay.
And one of the things he said was that by bringing international artists to South Africa, local artists could no longer have the excuse of not understanding what a good tattoo looks like.
Fair point.
And I think it's really exciting to have your coffees on the table, and for people to get to hear your perspective, and just to get their heads out of the tiny fishbowl, that the South African coffee industry is. So I'm really excited about that. But I would not be able to have this sit down with you without asking a few very important fitness questions on behalf of my team.
Fair enough. Sure.
So you'll meet Fani this week, but Fani is strong, and he does a lot of more CrossFit style training, and he's ex-amateur world Muay Thai champion, so he has got a martial arts background.
Sure.
But Fani wants to know your numbers.
Okay. Like number as in like the classic lift.
Yeah.
Oh Jesus Christ!
Are you willing to? Are you willing to share
I
that?
will say like this. So it's there's some of the lifts I do and some that I don't. Like bench pressing, I stopped a long time ago. It never made sense. I don't know. It's the most like unpractical. We're never at a point where we lay on our back and push stuff up. It's just
Come on, how do you get your
it's a
coffee bags
weird-
onto the shelf, Patrick?
I mean,
Surely.
not through bench presses, right? I mean, I'm a big on like deadlifting, squatting, and overhead press. Like now we're going very specific here, but for those of you that don't know, it's basically like some of the main, let's say, power lift movements, right?
And the overhead, do you do a variety of them, or is it just one movement?
That is a strict
press.
Strict press.
Okay.
Yeah. No fuss. I mean, if you do a non-strict, I can do a lot more.
Sure.
But I mean, that so could
I'm not putting you on the spot. You don't
anyone,
have to give
right?
us your specific numbers.
No. But it's so if we talk body weight because that's always the relevant number, right? On a normal day, also a difference between peak day and let's say normal day.
Yeah.
On a normal day, I can quite easily go in and squat about 2.4,
Your body
2.5 body weight.
That's it.
And my deadlift is very similar.
Okay.
My press has always been my way. Like I'm not an arm guy. Some people are, some people don't. I've always spent a lot more focus on especially deadlifts. It's kind of my favorite lift, and that's like a conventional deadlift and then very wide stance squat, pretty
Okay.
much,
A
just
wide
based
stance
on my
squat,
body body structure,
Okay.
and mainly just do box squats from a training
And
perspective.
how do you balance training at home versus training on the road? I'm assuming they'll
Difficult.
be very different.
Yeah, I think and I think it's been also when you get older, your recovery is a bit more difficult. You have different time zones, food, flying, all of this, right? And I think I've gotten a lot smarter with time, definitely. And I think now, for example, here, and we have a hotel, and the hotel has an okay gym. Like there's some stuff in the gym, right? So you have to kind of get over yourself a little bit, go in, do some functional stuff, do some more volume stuff. And it's more maintaining rather than building. I had a time where I was like frustrated because I know if I did this and I was having a max lift attempt 2 weeks later, that would fail because I'm traveling for a week and my food and sleep is not proper, right? And then I had a hard time kind of balancing that
Sure.
myself, but I think you get over it. I'm also training for me is much more than anything else is to keep my stress levels healthy, keep my body healthy. Again, getting, putting stuff into your day where you don't do anything else. Okay, I have writing and I have lifting, obviously April as well. But those are like the three things where I don't multitask. I don't, there's no distractions. There's no jumping in between tasks. It's like, this is what I'm doing right now. And I think a lot of people are, let's say, unable to do very high quality stuff because they're not able to do one thing for a very long time, right? So training for me is more really like a necessity than anything else. I think as I get older, I'll probably change that to be more, let's say, aesthetic rather than strength, because that's a lot easier for the body to handle. It's not so much impact on the body and stuff like that, right? But
Absolutely.
it's also something very satisfying with deadlifting, especially squatting. Like, squats is really, I think that's if you want to ask someone how strong they are, you ask them how much they squat.
Okay.
That's like the ultimate
And when
lift.
you say squats, you back squatting?
So back squats, yeah.
Okay.
Front squats as well, but I do suck at it.
Okay.
It's just it's like a difficult lift.
Yeah, it's such a difficult
I
lift.
think.
Yeah.
And it's so much body type, I think. I'm
Absolutely.
an inflexible dude.
I was going to
that
say
is-
range. If you don't have it, it's...
A range is easy. It's for me, it's the long leg
Okay.
kind of thing. Yeah, so I have to reposition very differently, but wide squats works. It's always
Amazing.
worked, yeah.
Amazing. And if there was one coffee that everyone should look out for this year, knowing what you've bought
From April.
from April?
That we still have, because you kind of already missed a good one.
Oh, really? Which was
yeah.
that? La Esmeralda.
No, but that we have more coming. Esmeralda is always amazing. We have a really exciting single farmer project coming out of Kenya. And Kenya for me is Kenya and Ethiopia is a headache quality wise. But I mean then we share a partner producer in Alejo, Volcana Sol,
and now Diego at El Socorro as well.
Yeah, I mean El Socorro is fantastic, right? It's their geisha is always. If you look at like quality for like price to quality ratio, there's no one in this industry that is even close. It's just fantastic. There is a better Pacamara in Guatemala though, which we have also, but it costs a lot more. But if you look at his washed geisha, most value for money in the history of geishas. It's fantastic. So I always really appreciate that. Always really appreciate the SL28 coming out of Volcano Sul. Also,
absolutely incredible.
Which we've been lucky to get quite a lot of this year, which I'm quite happy about. So I think maybe those are really the main coffees that I'm super excited about. Then we have some late season stuff coming in as well, like early next year. That's going to be really cool. So there's always something. No anaerobics though. So
no anaerobics at all.
No, so we're now officially. I mean, I've said that a few recordings already, but we're cutting out everything that isn't a standard processing method. And like I did a homebrewing video yesterday in Dubai, and 2 days ago, and the person brought this, I mean, she's quite famous in the coffee industry, but brought this coffee. It says like washed on the bag, and you like look at the beans, and then you smell the beans after the ground, and then you like smell the brewed coffee, and you go, well, that's not a washed coffee.
Washed with what exactly?
Yeah, and then it's like a wash that's gone through like a triple whatever, which is fine. Like people should do whatever they want to do processing wise, but one of the challenges in the industry that we then just call it washed.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like a washed coffee doesn't taste like a traditionally washed coffee. Granted, that can be different in different countries, but they just don't taste like that, right? So then call it something else. Just be clear, right? But yeah, we made the conscious decision, or I made the conscious decision to just stop all of it.
Is that going to be competition as well?
That's a really interesting question. I think that's the first one question. I mean, also me, because I've been competing with yeast fermentations. I've been competing with anaerobic fermentations. But I also used like a washed geisha in barista, and I mean that went pretty okay. So it's, I think it's like at April. First of all, if you are a competitor, and most people are, there's no April as a company will not go in and regulate what you're using.
Okay,
they have our full support. I believe competing is a personal expression, regardless of which company you work in. I've been in companies myself where I haven't, maybe received the support that I'm looking for as a competitor, which I also respect. But from our side, it's like the only hard line we draw is that when it's clearly infused in a way that there's really not a conversation.
Yeah.
And then personally, I don't do blends. I think blending in Brewer's Cup is that's a long story. But it's just not something I do, right? But at the same time, competition is a way to express yourself, improve yourself. And frankly, if you want to win anything or be in that final, going up with a traditionally processed coffee is a bit naive.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Then it's sad that that's the reality. But I'm also a person that chooses to see a lot of the other values in the competition. Like I have a lot of people saying I can't compete because I love washed coffees. And I mean, there's a lot you can get out of a competition regardless of that, right? Regardless of that result. And I mean, do it damn well as, with the traditional coffee, and maybe you can do pretty well, right? So I will not give a definitive answer on that. But I think personally, yes. From like future April competitors, not necessarily.
Okay, that's really interesting. So the SL28 from Volcanism will be high up on the list for us to look out for.
I think there's potential. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a good coffee.
So which processing have you bought from?
So so he's a funny example, and I love Alejo, right? But we had this conversation many times where anaerobic processing or any kind of, let's say, new processing is the issue. There is that most farmers don't know what they're doing. And that's okay, but I think there is an idea where a lot of buyers, a lot of roasteries, a lot of consumers, a lot of baristas always had these farmers on this like gold pedestal. Like, of course they know everything. Everyone knows what anaerobic fermentation is. Where it's most of the times it's a plastic bucket with a lid on it and a bunch of accumulation of liquid in the bottom, and the top part is no liquid, and there's just it's a mess. Me and specifically Alejo have had conversations about that, where I've been very, let's say, unappreciative of let's say the path he's taking on a lot of his coffees. Supportive in the sense that as a farmer he should do whatever he wants. It's not based on what I like. And
that's so interesting.
It is. I mean, it's one of the biggest challenges we have at April. It's finding farmers that. I mean, even Diego as Socorro, right? I mean, famous for washed coffees, and if you, he's funny, right? Because the difference between him and Alejo, and Alejo, I, again, really respected. He really likes his anaerobics, and I mean that's amazing, right? Like a farmer and a roaster or a barista, they should do the coffee they want to do.
Yeah.
Regardless of what Patrik or
I think the
anyone
anaerobic
else says, right?
SL28 is actually his favorite coffee off his farm.
He thinks it's amazing,
Yeah.
right? I disagree, but that's fine, right? But then let's say Diego, that was always like, yeah, no, I'm always wash coffees. I hate everything else. And then you come to the farm and you see a bunch of these blue tanks with lids on them, and you go, but Diego, why do you do this? Yeah, no, but people, people wants it and they pay a lot. I hate it, but they pay a lot. It's fine. So I think it's there's not even some farmers that do it doesn't even really want it. They don't like it or they don't care, but they know there's a market for it, and if someone's going to pay a lot of money, why not, right?
It's so interesting. He hasn't even told me that he does it, and I've had
he
no
doesn't.
samples.
Because I've been there, I've seen it, and it's so funny because I brought Joe from April with me on our latest trip to El Socorro, and I was like, yeah, just so you know, Joe, this is like the one farm you will never see tanks at, and we like drive up to the processing station and you go like, what's all of those blue buckets in the corner? And then like, yeah, I have this guy from Asia or Dubai that just want to pay a lot of money for me to put cherries in the bucket, and I put them there and I open them 5 days later, and then it's fine, and I sell the coffee, and that's all good, right? So
Yeah.
it's the randomness that goes into it, I think. So
We have
interesting.
We have a food like grocery store in South Africa called Woolworths.
Yep.
And on their pizzas and some of the other like Italian style foods, it literally says inspired by Italy.
Okay.
Like instead of made in Italy, it's like inspired by Italy, made locally.
Yeah, sure.
Which I always think is really funny.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like so many producers now internationally can be like inspired by Colombian producers.
I mean, we had a Best of Panama. I mean, now we're going a bit of out of track here, but Best of Panama this year, where one farmer was actually disqualified.
I heard.
And I mean, we don't have to mention the farmer's name or which farm it is, but they. Big part of that was the Colombian producer that person hired as a consultant, right? And we know like openly worked together for a long time, right? And I think that
the Panamanian farmer.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. So it's. The reason it was disqualified is very clearly linked to a very specific farm in Colombia, and
another famous farm, perhaps?
Pretty famous. And I mean, it turns out then that farmer had been a consultant for him. So I mean, it kind of makes a lot of sense. But
yeah.
I think again, it's I really don't care, right? What I care about is that as an industry, transparency is very important. We should be able to be open and honest towards the consumer, the roaster, the export, whatever, about what it is that we're doing, right? And then if the end consumer loves peach coffees better than they like my washed coffees, then it's up to me to make my washed coffees better. That's the whole point. So I have never had an issue. It's the same in competition. I don't have an issue that they exist. In a lot of ways, it's a natural progression of things. It's innovation. It's interesting. I'm sure eventually something good will come out of it. It's the understanding of what coffee is and what coffee isn't. That's really the challenge in the conversation.
And if we can't control that, then we have to be definitive about what our coffee is and what our coffee isn't.
Yeah, but I mean, we're again back to the industry, right? The specialty coffee is supposed to be the best shit. That's kind of how we always market ourselves,
exactly.
Right? And I think it's very clear. We have to be very clear with what that is and what that includes. And then I've always been very aware that the industry and Patrik, Rolf is going in two very different directions. And also a long time ago come to terms with the fact that it might be eventually a reality where what I do is just not financially liable anymore because me and the industry is so, let's say, far away, right?
Sure.
Which I'm okay with. But, for the time I'm in coffee, I will still try to get at least parts of that industry to, see. I mean, it's the same with competition. It's the inability to see value in the traditional coffee that is the issue. The issue is not that an infused coffee wins the world championships. They've been winning for a long time. This year, no different. I mean, that's not the issue. That's been a reality in competing since I started competing. It's just we haven't really talked about it, right?
Sure.
The issue is that, let's say we have a score sheet where washed geisha from El Socorro cannot get those scores.
That's a problem.
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
The challenge is not the other part.
Exactly.
Right? It's that we kind of forgot to value the qualities of, let's say, the more, I don't want to say the word traditional because it sounds like we're like old and boring, but it's that's the challenge, right?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, and I think for you and I completely understand what we mean, and we see a lot of the industry from the inside and our own supply chain and our own customer base and approach and that sort of thing. The difficulty is in the consumer understanding that without deep diving the whole industry. And there's this level of so my understanding, and this is so far off topic now, it's unbelievable. Well, here we go down the rabbit hole.
That's
down
my
the rabbit
fault,
hole. No, not at all. This is awesome. We don't get to have these conversations.
True though. Yeah.
But my understanding of these, like, less, for lack of a better term, experimental processed coffees, that's certainly how the terminology started. And then, thermal shock and infusions and co-ferments and all of these different terminologies started coming forward. But as you say, they've been around forever. They've been around for a really long time. I mean, cinnamon being added to Costa Rican coffee is the age-old sort of cliche in this space. But I think the driving force has been the roasters desperate to differentiate themselves in the market. Where you've got a roasting consultant in South Africa, a Q grader, once told me that there were 215 roasting machines in Cape Town, like one city. Unfortunately, most of them aren't roasting very good coffee, I don't think, but there are a lot of people roasting coffee. So if you want to differentiate yourself, how do you do that? And if you're small, how do you do that? If you're bigger and you have the balls to do something, you can, create a unique menu without having to go to these experimental fermentations. But the quickest way to do it is to buy a 25 kilo lot from a producer who just threw some cherry in a bin and, put the lid on it. So I feel like the middlemen, the roasters in this space, they're doing a disservice to the farmer's work by demanding these fermentations. And as Diego said to you, he does it because the buyers want it, not because he wants to do it.
100%. He does. I mean, I try to actually have him do like a natural. We buy one natural processed coffee from him, because I also, again, it's we always taste everything. We were interested in it. I taste Robusta as well. It tastes like crap, but I still taste it. We're not going to sell it at April, but it's we're trying to understand things, right? But he doesn't even like that, right? So I think it's. Again, a big industry perspective. What are we teaching someone? We've been having the likes of Tim Mendibo telling farmers, or like Intelligentsia early on, this is how you need to process your coffee. Sorting is really important. And then we have a Brazilian person saying that, oh, no, you take the stuff you sorted out and then that will taste amazing because you put some processing on it, right? So you're, sure, you should maybe use all the coffee, but you're teaching someone on a farm level that, okay, but you don't really have to sort your coffee. You don't really have to, don't really care about that. Just do this processing thing, right? I think it detracts from a lot of the work we already put in, right? And I mean, that's why in Panama, what happened in the Best of Panama is because you have a bunch of farmers that are terrified that they can't sell a geisha for $300 a kilo anymore because at $20 a kilo Colombian coffee will people will like that more.
Absolutely.
So it's again, as support the aspect that people want to do better coffee. I think that's a relevant, interesting thing. We should always explore how we can do better stuff, right? We just have to be a point where we take a decision as an industry, as in where we kind of stand with it, right? Is there something we want to lift that's like the best coffee in the world is going to be an infused Colombian coffee, right? Fair enough if the industry decides that, right? But I think it's just maybe important to make that decision down the road, right? And again, I think there's always been this stigma that we do it because our customer wants it, and bullshit.
Yeah,
like the customer never asked for that, I think that we were so lucky to have an audience of especially homebrewers, but also business owners that they're just curious and supportive, and they want to taste stuff and they want to listen to your perspective, right? there's none of them that were like, I need my coffee to taste exactly like a fresh fruit.
Exactly.
Like that's not, because coffee doesn't taste like that, right? It's I think that's something that we it's a mess we made ourselves, you know. But again, like support it, right? And I mean, there's a part of me that is also it's kind of a fun, interesting ride. You know, I enjoy seeing people trying to figure out where they want to be on let's say that spectrum, right? And I think I can do that because I've so clearly defined where I would already be on that spectrum. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think the fun, interesting ride would be if you were a fly on the wall in these roasteries trying to roast these crazy coffees.
Oh, I mean, it's just inconsistency.
Wow.
So it's like two things, one, right? It's like the people that believe that any of these coffees can be consistent. They're on every kind of level, whether it's a chemical level or if it's sensory level or green coffee level, like impossible. Anyone that knows anything actually about fermentations will tell you it's impossible, especially in the environment it's being done in, right? Again, probably always an anomaly or two somewhere in the world, right? But in general, impossible. And I think that consistency is the biggest issue. And then two, it's we spend so much time going. That's what I tell Alejo as well. You know, I don't go half across the world to your farm specifically in Costa Rica to have your coffee taste like other people's coffee. That's
Exactly.
not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I want to showcase how your coffee is tasting with the world. But through some of the processing you're doing, you're making your coffee taste like all the other coffees that are processed like that across the world. So I no longer know if I'm tasting your SL28 or your geisha, or if I'm tasting an Indonesian geisha. I don't know anymore because it all tastes the same, right? Within, obviously it's not identical, but you get what I'm trying to say, right?
Absolutely. Processing first, farm second, and that's not what we want.
I mean, there was also there was another podcast, and again, I don't listen, but there was someone in the April team that said it as well, where it's like, terroir doesn't matter anymore. It's all about the process. And it was like, the sad thing is that it's maybe true, right? That's the whole thing. Like maybe it is.
My knee-jerk reaction is I'm out. Like if that's the case,
I mean,
because I don't think
it's
that's
pretty unsexy. I think.
Yeah.
It's,
yeah, absolutely.
It's a strange industry. But again, cycles and new stuff and
maybe wine should be our inspiration because at least they've been through so much of this already.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And now, the return to natural wines and doing some amazing stuff in that space is inspirational. I have a few friends in that industry, and
especially here, right? I mean,
yeah, we've actually got a wine in a cellar in Cape Town. We're in Stellenbosch at the moment. That was produced for us.
Oh, cool.
So we're going to do like an anaerobic coffee with an anaerobic wine. It's a special release later this year.
Okay.
With Sam Lamson from Minimalist Wines.
Yeah, cool.
And I don't know if you enjoy wine, but
yeah, sure.
He does an amazing job.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they're so, and again, like, don't want to be too pessimistic here. It's like, again, people do whatever they want to do. It's fine, right? It's just, there used to be a time where you can go into a random coffee shop in the world and there was something on that menu you kind of wanted to taste. And now I find myself so often going into coffee shops and I go, no,
I'll have an orange
there's
juice.
like nothing here I want to actually taste. And I think that's sad.
Yep.
I think it's, put a washed coffee there.
Oh, no, I
why not?
completely agree.
It's,
I completely agree.
I think it's, I'm just curious when that change happened. I don't know, but it has happened. It's here. And I mean, it's the same April Brewers Cup. We only do traditional processing.
Yeah.
Because again, I want it to be a brewing competition. I want to move away from that the green coffee is such a big part of your competition, which in the World Championship it really is.
Yeah.
Because it should be about that brewing skill.
And I'm curious to see. I'll come find you after the competition on Thursday. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how people have brewed this coffee.
Yeah, me too.
Because I don't know, obviously the competition coffee itself, but the pre-competition bags. I think a lot of people are going to struggle to extract it well if they're brewing a lot of anaerobics infused coffees and that type of thing.
Yeah, sure. It's quite different, right? And then
very different.
Granted, is roasted locally, cedar, right? Which I haven't tried much coffee from, so that's also going to be really interesting. But I think it's part of the journey. We're trying to, like, the April Brewers Cup is always try to be like inclusive, right? Because I could just say it's my brewer, I'm gonna roast the coffee, you're gonna do it my way, right? But we're also trying to be like, okay, but again, we're who do we have in the local community that wants to do stuff? What can we actually do together and kind of lift them up, right? So I think it's a balance,
cool.
right? And brewing coffee, if everything is done perfectly, green coffee wise and roasting, is kind of easy. So it's always nice when there's a bit of a curveball in it, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully I'll stick a spoon in some cups during the week.
For sure, you should, absolutely.
Yeah.
Super.
Well, Patrik, thank you so much. And
thank you, man.
It's been great to have you on.
Super nice.
And we'll catch up somewhere else in the world soon, I'm sure.
Definitely.
All right, man. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Coffee Made Me Do It podcast. I'm really excited to have this series back up and running again. I'll be touring Europe over the next month or so and having conversations with some amazing coffee professionals along the way. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have, please share it with your mates and give us a follow. You can also catch up with us on all our social media platforms linked below. My name's Dario. I'll see you in the next one.